Welcome to Our Girl Relationships. We talk about the problems people face in their day to day lives. Let's start with the video.
I, female 30, met my husband, male 33, Joseph, in our neighborhood. He had just moved in there with his family, and even though we were in different high schools, I decided to approach him and we began talking. We became great friends, but it wasn't until 3 years later that I had gotten into college when Joseph really asked me out. We were in the same college. He was 2 years ahead of me, and the fact that we hung out a lot more because of that, I said yes when he asked me on a date, and as it turned out, that we were even better as a couple. Even perfect, I'd say. It was like we were so different, but our differences really complemented each other. Like my talkative side went along great with his quiet side, and so much more. In this way, our friendship that had turned into a relationship after about 6 months of seeing each other bloomed into something extremely beautiful. So much so that we got engaged right after getting out of college, and everyone around us was so supportive of that. As all of this went on and my relationship with Joseph progressed and went through the phases that all relationships go through, my sister, Mariella, had been living in Europe all along. She left the house for college when she was 17, even got into one, but couldn't sustain herself even for a couple of years. She immediately dropped out by the end of the second semester. It wasn't surprising to us, though, because that all is just very typical to her. It just gave an insight into what kind of a person she is. So after dropping out, Mariella got with her very rich boyfriend that she had met in her college itself and started living with him. We knew nothing about this guy. All we knew was that he had a lot of money because the girl who had left with just enough money that would get her through a year in college was now driving expensive cars, going to expensive salons, buying expensive clothes and such. And with her change in lifestyle, her communication towards us changed as well. As each day passed by, she had started contacting us less and less, telling us less and less about her life, even when my parents expressed their concerns towards her living with a guy who we knew nothing about. And eventually, boom, it all just stopped. Honestly, I was glad about it all because Mariella was never, ever a great person, at least in my eyes. Ever since I can recall, she had always thought of herself as a person who thought had an edge over the others simply because she had the looks, and she used it so much to make everyone around her feel horrible about themselves simply because of that. But in all honesty, she had nothing outside her looks. Her grades were terrible, she was entitled AF, and was just a horrible person overall. It was outside, though, and in front of me, because to my parents and my other elder siblings, she was like the perfect angel sent from heaven with her looks, kindness, and everything. Only I knew what she was like underneath because I was the one who truly had to go through her torment after all. So when every time my family would mourn the loss of her, I would really try to pretend that I cared and stuff, but of course, only I knew that there wasn't a day in my life that I was grateful that she wasn't around me anymore. It wasn't like I didn't have concerns for my own, though, because I thought this phase of hers would eventually fade away and she would definitely return one day or the other, but nope. Years upon years passed. Joseph and I even got married, and Mariella was nowhere to be seen. And of course, there wasn't anything we could do because every time we tried to contact her, we knew she had seen our attempts but couldn't care less to respond. Hell, we even sent over cops once to do a wellness check on her, and that was the day my parents had their heart broken as they were informed by the cops that she was all well and good, just not interested to keep in touch with them. Not gonna lie, that day I felt bad for them as well. But of course, that was just me having a sense of humanity in me, unlike them, who have and had absolutely no care in the world about anything except their princess. Well, years and years passed, and eventually Mariella did contact my parents. She just spoke to them over Facebook once in a blue moon, and honestly, by the way it looked, it was obvious that she just wanted to flex her lifestyle to them, but they seemed happy at that too, and so I let it be. focusing on my marriage with Joseph, which has been going so well. We had been running strong and on the verge of completing our 8th year of marriage when this bombshell was dropped on me. You see, pandemic had brought some obvious tension and conflict between Joseph and I. We had a lot of arguments, at least when you compare it to how we were before. It was all understandable because these arguments were nowhere close for it to be called a sign of a toxic relationship. And I thought we were doing an amazing job getting over our differences through therapy, but nope, that was far, far from the case. And I was going to find that out in one of the worst ways possible. It all started after a year had passed from the pandemic. My parents very randomly called me and were buzzing in excitement and happiness. Then they revealed to me that Mariella had reached out to them and told them that she was going to visit the USA the very next month itself. Although I wasn't the most excited, I was happy to see my parents happy and began helping them as they cleaned out a room, especially for Mariella to stay. So Mariella returns back to our home state, and everyone in my family is going crazy over it. The moment I saw her, I could just make out that she had changed a lot, and in the worst ways possible. I'm not even going to try to get into that because honestly, that alone would take up the entire post. But yeah, she was back, and everyone began spoiling her, and soon enough, watching everyone do that, my husband, too, jumped on the train and started to change his behavior toward her. He went from being formal to speaking highly of her because she had gone through so much. Yes, she was back here with a sob story. Her husband, who we knew nothing about, had divorced her because, of course, why else would she be here? So she's getting all this attention and time, not just from my husband, but from family too. And I can't help but sit down to gently remind him what type of a person she was and how she was one of the root causes of all my mental health issues. That is when he dropped it on me to made me realize that it was the day our marriage had come to an end. He started screaming at me, telling me how I'm just a jealous B word because Mariella is just better than me, and how I just can't see him and her happy to form a bond. I was left stunned, and I just knew what to ask him. I asked him if he was in love with her, and after a long pause, I knew I had gotten my answer. I left the house that day itself as Joseph left the house to live with Mariella. You know what the nail on the coffin was, though? The fact that none, I mean none, of my family reached out to me. Needless to say, I was heartbroken and lonely to the max. I had no one except for friends who tried their level best to be there for me. Well, it wasn't like I could do anything about it, though, and so I started to try and live life, accepting the reality until last week when my ex-husband showed up to my house in the middle of the night, banging on my friend's door. The moment she opened it, he began demanding for me, and the moment he saw me, he began crying like an actual baby. He was pretty drunk and began senselessly talking about things. From what I could make out, though, apparently Mariella had already begun sucking the life out of him by being demanding of his money. And of course, to me, she was just going along with her plan, but to my ex-husband, who I had very clearly warned about her behavior, was surprising. I simply just laughed at his face when I heard all of this because, to me, obviously, this all wasn't even a bit shocking and just shut the door on his face. After knocking a couple of times, he gave up too and left. That is when my issue arises, though, because the very next day, my phone started blowing up with messages from his side of the family, blaming me for giving up on our marriage so easily, expressing their disappointment in me. Although I immediately put my foot down and reassured myself there's a slight bit of conflict in me, so Reddit, AITA, I decided to call up my ex-mother-in-law to tell her to put a stop on all the spam because I had enough trying to get back to them all. I told her that the fact that her son was a cheat wasn't on me, and upon hearing that, she was pretty damn dumbfounded, as if she had no idea what I was talking about. So she asked me about it, and I asked her back instead what she thought was the reason behind our separation. After a couple of minutes of silence, she told me that it would be better if we could meet and talk somewhere out, and honestly, that was a good idea. My ex mother in law is a pretty level headed woman, so I hope this conversation ends up being fruitful. Furthermore, I decided to shoot Mariella's supposedly ex husband, who still has pictures of them up on his account, lol, a message on Facebook. I explained to him who I was, what I was messaging him for, and stuff in brief. I haven't received a response as of yet, but whenever I do, I would definitely update you all. Hi, all. I met up with my ex mother in law today. So basically, the meeting with my ex mother in law revealed a lot. And honestly, all good for me because it just gave me more of a reason to want to move on from Joseph. Apparently, Joseph had told his entire family that the reason we split was because I wasn't satisfied with the amount of money he made. Not only that, he only informed them of this last week when we had been separated for literally 2 months now. And that is what I explained to her. Everything that actually went down and how he had been living with my parents recently. I told her to go see for herself if she didn't believe me. She thanked me and apologized profusely, telling me that she hopes I could give her an opportunity to fix things. Not sure what she meant by that yet, but I said yes because at the end of the day, it wasn't really her mistake. Here's a final update. Joseph's life has seemed to have turned upside down as me messaging Mariella's husband has caused her to fly back home to him because apparently they were never divorced. Mariella was only here to make some money from my parents and Joseph, who both agreed to pay for her college and also help her with the down payment of a house. Furthermore, Joseph's parents and family, upon finding out about his infidelity, decided to cut him out completely, even kicking him out of the house we both used to live in because it belonged to them. Joseph was going to inherit it after a couple of years, but his mom has now removed his name from the will and put mine on it as an apology gift, which was honestly very shocking but also amazing because it was a great kickstart to my new life. I have also served Joseph divorce papers, and overall, he seems to be quite literally pushed out of his social circles. My parents, too, don't want anything to do with him, and of course, me, because we're the ultimate cause of them losing their daughter once again, which I honestly don't believe and never would. Lastly, I want to thank you all for your amazing support and advice. I wouldn't have made all of these decisions if I didn't receive the tough love and reassurance from you all. NTA, file for a divorce and let everyone know what a horrible person Joseph is. You deserve so much better, OP. NTA, Joseph was clearly looking for a way out, and as soon as he saw your sister giving him a chance, he took it, only to be slapped in the face, which he very much deserved. F what everyone else says. I'm female, and my parents divorced 6 years ago, and my mom has been dating her new boyfriend for a year and a half. Despite that, I only met him 6 months ago, and I've seen him a handful of times, maybe two, three. He seems like a good guy, and I've got nothing against him. Now, I spend half the month with mom and the rest with my dad. I usually come home around 1 to 2 p.m., and my mom gets out of work at around 4 to 5 p.m., sometimes 6 to 7 if she's having a date with him and I'm alone at home, which is okay. I don't mind, and I actually enjoy it very much. My dad also lives 10 minutes away from here, so I know I can always call him. Yesterday, my mom said she'll be back at around 7 to 8 because she had a small dinner with her boyfriend's parents, and I said, okay. She was supposed to change before at her boyfriend's house, but forgot her dress, and I called her when I got home and see it laying on her bed. She thanked me and said she'll make a quick trip to get it. But an hour after that, she called me again and said that her boyfriend was on the way, and almost as soon as she did it, her boyfriend rang the bell. I opened the door a bit to confirm it was him, and I say hi and to wait there. He tried to open the door and said, no, let me get the dress. And I forced back and said there's no need for him to come in since I would bring the dress to him. He said no again, and I pretended to let him in so I could close the door quickly. I wouldn't lie. I didn't want him there with me because I don't know the guy at all. And as I said, I could easily bring the dress to him, which is what I did. He took it very angrily and called me a rude brat before leaving. My mom came at night with him, and they both berated me for my behavior. Despite me telling my mom that I don't know him and he was the rude one, I ended up calling my dad, and he picked me up. When my mom's boyfriend saw him, he instantly backed off, and my dad said he'll talk to her later. She texted me, calling me an AH for making this bigger than it is. NTA, no, the boyfriend made it bigger than it is, not you. Then he went whining to your mother and got her in on it too. He was supposed to pick up the dress. There was no need for him to come in unless he had some other motive. NTA, your mom is, especially for doubling down and gaslighting you after the fact. Not sure if it is possible, feasible, but I would highly suggest talking to your dad about changing the living situation until this guy is out of the picture. The fact that a grown man who you've only interacted with 2 to 3 times previously thinks he has a right to berate you in front of your mother is scary. Not only that, she allowed him to do it and took his side. That is even more terrifying. People rarely show their worst behavior the first time they explode, which means he is likely capable of more aggressive reactions down the road, and she basically signaled her willingness to allow it. She may not realize it right now, but she's choosing to put her relationship with him above the one she has with you. I know that sucks to think about, but take it from someone who has been there with a parent. Put your safety, physical and mental, before her. I, female 32, used to be friends with Sarah, 28. However, with time, she started exhibiting some odd behavior that creeped me out. She started copying how I dress, how I do my hair, my way of life. It was to a point where people started noticing. Sarah and I worked together, and I didn't want to cause any issues at work, so instead of doing any sort of confrontation, I simply slowly distanced myself and we mostly see each other at work, occasionally at some work night outs. She still copies my looks, but since she doesn't know much about my life beyond what she hears from others, she can't do much else. E.g., I don't see her at 5 a.m. at my gym's swimming pool when I am going for a swim, despite her living at the opposite end of town and using a different gym before. Sarah just moved into her new, freshly renovated house. She invited our whole department for her housewarming party, and I couldn't really say no, and since everyone was going, I was fine with being there. When I entered her house, I felt like I was entering a distorted copy of my own house. She copied my house design as closely as she could. Obviously, she wasn't able to copy everything down to a T for various reasons, but she was pretty darn close. It felt so surreal and odd. It was like I was at my own house, but at the same time I wasn't. I tried to ignore it, and since I only saw the ground floor, I didn't want to jump to any conclusions, but my other coworkers, those who have seen my house, mentioned the similarities to me. We all got pretty drunk, and at one point I needed to go to the toilet. The downstairs one was occupied, and Sarah told me that I can go upstairs. I went with another coworker as she needed a toilet too. Walking upstairs, things gotten even more creepy. Her carpets, her paint, her decorations, her furniture, everything kept matching my decor. I mentioned it to my other coworker, and she said that she noticed but didn't want to bring it up. When I was waiting outside the toilet, I decided to snoop a little, which may make me an a-hole as well, and I entered her bedroom. It was bloody identical to mine, down to a blanket on her bed and books on her bedside table. Heck, she even arranged her wardrobe the same way I have mine. Told you I snooped. I was done, and clearly alcohol gave me courage. I went downstairs and went ballistic, shouting at her to stop being an effing creep and to stop copying me with everything I do. I grabbed my stuff, told her to get a life, and left her house. A few coworkers followed me, trying to comfort me. She's been trying to contact me since then, messaging me that it was her private bedroom and I wasn't supposed to see that, and I should have never have been creeping in her house, and what an a-hole I was for shouting at her and making a scene in her own house. I do feel bad for causing a scene. but I must say it creeped me out. I'm not proud of losing control, but before I replied to her, was I really the a-hole here? You. Had she seen your bedroom? How did she know your wardrobe scheme? Can you remove her from your life completely? NTA. That's